Look, I want you to try something tomorrow morning. Step outside. Find a patch of open sky. Don't look at the sun. Just let the light fall on your face for 90 seconds. Eyes open, looking forward, standing still. Now I'm going to tell you exactly what just happened inside your head. Because tonight, when darkness comes, a gland buried deep in the middle of your brain is going to release a hormone called melatonin somewhere between 30 minutes and 3 hours earlier than it would have if you'd stayed indoors. That's the claim. Let me show you the mechanism, molecule by molecule, structure by structure, and by the end of this lecture you will see why a piece of advice your grandmother gave you about morning sunshine turns out to be a precise prescription written 400 million years before anyone had a name for it. Before we talk about light, I have to tell you about something inside your eye that nobody mentioned in your school biology class. You learned about rods and cones. The rods see in dim light. The cones see color. These are the cells whose long fibers braid together at the back of the eye to form the optic nerve, and they send images to the part of your brain that lets you watch this lecture. Fine. Textbook stuff. There is a third type of light-sensitive cell in your retina. It does not form images. It does not contribute to your conscious vision. It does not care, in the strictest sense, what you are looking at, only how much light is in front of you, and what color of light, and for how long. It hides among what we call the ganglion cells. About 1 or 2 of every 100 ganglion cells contains a pigment called melanopsin. Melanopsin is a photopigment, like the rhodopsin in your rods, but it is tuned differently. It absorbs most strongly at a wavelength of 480 nanometers. The blue end of the visible spectrum, the wavelength of a clear daytime sky, almost as if these cells were custom built to detect daylight, and only daylight. The cells are called intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells, IPRGCs for short. The man who proved their existence is David Burson at Brown University, who showed in 2002 that you could put one of these cells in a dish in total isolation, with no input from the rods or the cones, and shine a light on it, and the cell would fire. They are direct photodetectors. They do not need permission from anything else in the eye to know that the sun is up, and they have somewhere very specific to send their signal. Here is the architecture nobody draws on the high school biology poster. The fibers from these melanopsin cells leave the eye along with all the regular image-forming fibers. They travel back through the optic nerve, about halfway into your skull, just above the place where the 2 optic nerves cross, a spot called the optic chiasm. Most of the melanopsin fibers peel off. They do not continue back to the visual cortex at the rear of your head. They take a sharp turn upward. Their destination is a tiny knot of about 20,000 neurons sitting directly above the chiasm, just under the floor of your hypothalamus. The structure has a name, the suprachiasmatic nucleus, SYN. Each one, there is one on each side, is roughly the size of a grain of rice. The path the fibers take from eye to sen has its own name, the retinohypothalamic tract, and it is the wire that hooks the photon coming in from the sun directly to the master clock of your body. I want to repeat that, because the architecture is what matters. A photon of blue wavelength light, having left the surface of the sun 8 minutes and 20 seconds earlier, enters your eye. It travels through the cornea, through the aqueous humor, through the lens, through the vitreous. It lands on the retina at the back of your eyeball. It does not stop at the rods. It does not stop at the cones. It penetrates further in, all the way to the inner layer where the ganglion cells sit, and it strikes a single melanopsin molecule. The molecule changes shape. The cell fires. The signal travels backward along the optic nerve, peels off at the chiasm, and arrives at your sen within milliseconds. 20,000 neurons just received the news that the sun is up. And the skin does not make melatonin itself. Not directly. So we have more wiring to follow. The skin is what we call a master clock. Each cell inside it contains a feedback loop of about a dozen genes that take roughly 24 hours to complete one cycle. The genes have names: period, cryptochrome, BMAL1, Clock. They turn each other on and off in a rhythm that runs autonomously. If you took one CN neuron out of a human brain and kept it alive in a dish in total darkness, it would continue its 24-hour cycle for weeks. The clock is built in. But, and here is the curious thing, the clock runs slightly long. In most adults, the natural period is closer to 24 hours and 10 minutes. So every day, without correction, your internal clock drifts later by about a quarter of an hour. After a week of pure darkness, you would be running 90 minutes behind the sun. After a month, you would be roughly half a day off. After a year, you would have lost track entirely. Light is what corrects the drift. When the skin receives the photon signal from the IPRGCs, the firing pattern resets the gene expression cycle. Morning light pulls the clock earlier. Evening light pushes it later. We call this phase shifting. The curve that describes how strongly the skin responds at different times of day has its own name, the phase response curve. The man who has mapped it most precisely in human beings is Charles Czeisler at Harvard Medical School, who has spent 40 years putting people in time isolation chambers and shining controlled doses of light into their eyes to measure exactly how the human clock moves. Here is the number I want you to keep. A single bright morning light exposure of about 30 to 90 minutes at an intensity of 10,000 lux or higher can advance your circadian phase by roughly 1 to 1.5 hours. Outdoor sunlight on a cloudy morning is somewhere between 10,000 and 20,000 lux. A bright outdoor afternoon can be 100,000. A well-lit office or kitchen is rarely above 500. So a quarter of an hour outside in the morning delivers a stronger phase signal than 8 hours under your kitchen ceiling. The numbers are not close. They are off by orders of magnitude. These are not just light-detecting cells. They are clock-setting cells. They do nothing else. The whole purpose of melanopsin and the IPRGC and the retinal hypothalamic tract is to tell a clock made of genes, in a knot of neurons the size of a grain of rice, what time it is in the world outside your skull. But the skin does not yet release the hormone. The clock has been adjusted. Now the clock has to send its time to the gland that actually produces the chemistry of darkness. And the wiring nature chose for that signal is, frankly, eccentric. The signal leaves the skin, drops down through the brainstem, exits your skull entirely, travels down the spinal cord to the upper thoracic level, between your shoulder blades more or less, and synapses there. Then it loops all the way back up the side of the neck through a structure called the superior cervical ganglion. From the ganglion, the fibers climb back into the skull and end on a small gland sitting almost exactly at the geometric center of your brain. The pineal gland, about the size of a grain of rice, shaped like a pine cone, which is where its name comes from. Descartes thought it was the seat of the soul. He was wrong about that. But he was right that it does something none of the surrounding tissue does. It manufactures melatonin. The molecule was first isolated and named in 1958 by Aaron Lerner, a dermatologist at Yale. He was, in fact, looking for a substance that would lighten skin pigmentation. He found one in cow pineal glands and named it melatonin, from the Greek for black and the suffix tonin, because it caused frog skin pigment to contract. The skin lightening application turned out to be commercially uninteresting, but the molecule turned out to be the master hormonal signal of darkness in vertebrates. Every vertebrate, from lampreys to whales to you. Melatonin is synthesized in 3 steps. Tryptophan, the same amino acid you eat in protein, is converted first into serotonin. Yes, the same serotonin you have heard about in the context of mood. Then an enzyme called N-acetyltransferase adds an acetyl group to make N-acetylserotonin. Then a second enzyme called HYOMT, for hydroxyindolomethyltransferase, adds a methyl group, and you have melatonin. The rate-limiting step is the N-acetyltransferase, and the N-acetyltransferase is regulated almost entirely by the skin. When the skin says it is dark, the enzyme ramps up, and pineal melatonin output rises by about tenfold within an hour or two. When the skin says it is light, the enzyme stays suppressed, and melatonin output stays low. The onset of melatonin secretion in the evening has a name. Dim light melatonin onset, DELMO. It is the most reliable physiological marker of where your circadian system actually thinks it is in time. Regardless of what your wall clock says, regardless of what your work calendar demands, regardless of what time you tell yourself you are going to bed, the timing of your DELMO is not fixed. It is not a property of your genes alone. It is set by the cumulative light exposure your scene has received in the previous 24 hours, weighted heavily toward the morning. Morning light advances it. Evening light delays it. The brighter and earlier the morning light, the earlier the melatonin will rise that night. The dimmer and later the evening light, the easier melatonin will hold its rhythm. Scheisler's group at Harvard has shown repeatedly, in carefully controlled chamber studies, that even a single morning bright light exposure can advance DELMO by 30 to 90 minutes the following evening. Now think about this for a moment. Think about the woman in her late 60s who wakes at 3 in the morning convinced that something is wrong, who lies awake with her heart pounding, who has been told by 3 different doctors to practice good sleep hygiene, who has tried melatonin pills, who has tried meditation, who lives in a building where the bedroom curtains are drawn and the morning is spent in artificial light, and the first time she sees the sky is at noon, through a windshield, on her way to lunch. Her CN has not been calibrated against the sun in months. Her DELMO has crept later, and her wake time has crept earlier, and the gap between them has shrunk to almost nothing. The solution she needs is not in a bottle. It is in the morning sky she is no longer looking at. 90 seconds is not a lot. 90 seconds is the lower end of what the data supports as effective. But 90 seconds of 10,000 lux outdoor light, hitting her melanopsin cells at the right phase of the morning, is a measurable input. A longer dose would be stronger. The mechanism, however, is identical to the lab-controlled phase shift. The same wiring, the same molecules, the same N-acetyltransferase ramping up at the same hour, only earlier. Now I want to show you something that textbooks usually skip. Because what happened to your eye during those 90 seconds also happened to your skin, and the skin is doing chemistry that has nothing to do with melatonin and everything to do with why morning sunlight makes you feel the way it does. While those photons of blue light were entering your retina, photons of ultraviolet light, specifically UVA, in the range of 320 to 400 nanometers, were striking the surface of your skin. Your skin has been doing something curious. For decades, it has been quietly stockpiling a chemical called nitric oxide, along with its reservoirs nitrate and nitrite, in the dermis just below the surface. Nitric oxide, 2 atoms, 1 nitrogen, 1 oxygen, a gas at room temperature, a free radical. It is one of the most important signaling molecules in mammalian physiology. It is also, incidentally, the active mechanism behind the nitroglycerin tablets that cardiologists give to people having a heart attack. Same molecule, different delivery. Richard Weller, a dermatologist at the University of Edinburgh, has shown over the last 15 years that when UV light strikes the skin, it cleaves the nitrogen-oxygen bonds in those dermal stores and releases free nitric oxide into the small blood vessels of the skin. From the skin, it diffuses into systemic circulation. Within minutes, the smooth muscle cells lining your arteries relax. The vessels widen. Your blood pressure drops by an amount that, in his published work, averages 2 to 5 millimeters of mercury. 2 to 5 millimeters of mercury does not sound like much. It is roughly 1/4 of the effect of a starting dose of a typical blood pressure medication. But it is sustained for hours. It is achieved without a pill, without a side effect, without a prescription. And Weller has argued in editorials in the European Heart Journal that the cardiovascular benefit of cumulative sun exposure may outweigh the skin cancer risk in many populations, a claim that has caused enormous controversy in dermatology. You have to be careful here, and I want to be precise about it. The nitric oxide pathway and the melatonin pathway are independent of each other. Light through the eye sets the clock. Light on the skin drops the pressure. They are not the same mechanism. Anybody who tells you that sunshine on your skin is what controls your sleep, is conflating two different physical pathways and doing the science a disservice. But here is what they share. They share a temporal window. The same morning sunlight that resets the skin is also pulsing nitric oxide out of your skin's dermal stores. The morning light walk does both things at once. It phase advances your melatonin onset by hours that night. It widens your arteries that morning. They are not the same molecule. They are not the same pathway. But they happen on the same patch of bare skin during the same patch of bare time. There is one more pathway I want to walk you through, and then I want to calibrate everything for you so you know which claims are solid and which are still soft. The third thing happening on your skin during morning sunlight is a chemical reaction that has been running in vertebrates for at least 400 million years. A photon of light, wavelength in the range of 280 to 315 nanometers, energy of around 4.4 electron volts, strikes a molecule called 7-dehydrocholesterol sitting in the membranes of your keratinocytes. Keratinocytes are the dominant cells of the outer skin layer. The photon breaks one specific carbon-carbon bond in the steroid ring. The molecule rearranges itself by pure thermodynamics into previtamin D3. Over the following hours, it converts to vitamin D3. Then your liver hydroxylates it. Then your kidney hydroxylates it again. And the final product, calcitriol, 1,25-dihydroxyvitamin D, binds receptors on your DNA in cells across your body and changes the expression of about 1,000 genes. Michael Holick at Boston University has spent his career mapping this pathway. He has shown that 10 to 15 minutes of summer midday sun on the arms and legs in a fair-skinned person can produce somewhere between 1,000 and 10,000 international units of vitamin D, substantially more than a typical supplement. 90 seconds is not enough for a meaningful vitamin D dose. I want to be honest about that. Vitamin D synthesis is the slowest of the three pathways. You need minutes, not seconds. You need UV specifically, which is largely filtered by glass and is absent before mid-morning at higher latitudes. The morning quick step outside is not going to fix a vitamin D deficiency. That requires longer exposure or a supplement. There is one further pathway, and this one is more speculative. The same UV light striking the keratinocytes triggers expression of a gene called propiomelanocortin, POMC. POMC is a precursor protein that gets enzymatically cleaved into several smaller signaling molecules. Alpha melanocyte stimulating hormone, which drives melanin production and gives you a tan, but also beta endorphin. Beta endorphin is one of the body's endogenous opioids. It acts on the same receptors as morphine and oxycodone, at much lower concentrations and with much shorter duration. Andrzej Slominski at the University of Alabama has been the loudest voice arguing that the skin is, functionally, a peripheral mood-regulating organ. The molecular machinery is real. The receptors are real. The systemic measurement of skin-derived beta-endorphin in humans is harder than it sounds. We will get to where exactly this evidence sits in a moment. 5 mechanisms now. Let me grade them. I want to do this honestly, because not all of these sit at the same level of certainty, and I do not want you walking away from this lecture overselling any one of them. The first tier, call it bedrock physiology, is the photon to melatonin chain. Melanopsin in retinal ganglion cells. The retinohypothalamic tract from eye to CN. The scene as the master clock. The polysynaptic projection from sen to pineal. Melatonin synthesis from serotonin via N-acetyltransferase. The phase-shifting effect of morning light on circadian timing. All of this is replicated, mapped at single-cell resolution, and uncontroversial across hundreds of independent labs in dozens of countries. The chain from photon to melatonin is as well established as any pathway in human physiology. If you remember nothing else from this lecture, remember that this is solid ground. The second tier is the dose-response curve. The exact phase shift you will get from your particular 90 seconds of light depends on the time of day, the brightness of the sky, the cleanliness of your eyeglasses, the color of your iris, your age, your starting circadian phase, and probably half a dozen variables nobody has measured. The direction of the effect, earlier morning light produces earlier melatonin onset, is established beyond reasonable doubt. The exact magnitude for you on a given Tuesday is not. Anyone giving you precise numerical predictions is bluffing. The third tier is strong mechanism, modest clinical effect, the nitric oxide vasodilation pathway. Weller's work has been replicated by independent groups. The molecular mechanism is solid, but the blood pressure drop in healthy people is small. It is not a substitute for treatment of hypertension. It may be additive. The strongest evidence comes from epidemiological data showing higher all-cause mortality at low cumulative sun exposure, data that is correlational, not interventional. The fourth tier is plausible, partially measured, real but quantitatively uncertain. Vitamin D synthesis from short exposures. The reactions are textbook. The output depends very strongly on latitude, season, time of day, skin tone, age, and exposed surface area. 90 seconds will not give you a meaningful dose. 20 minutes might. Trying to optimize it without blood work is guesswork. The fifth tier, the softest, is the skin-derived beta-endorphin pathway. The molecular machinery exists. The receptors exist. Measuring meaningful systemic effects from skin-derived opioids in living humans is methodologically difficult. The mood improvement people report after sunlight may or may not be due to this pathway. It may be due to circadian alignment, or to vitamin D, or to nitric oxide-mediated cerebral perfusion, or simply to the act of going outside. We cannot yet separate them cleanly. So when I tell you that 90 seconds of morning sunlight changes tonight's melatonin, I am making a Tier 1 claim. When I tell you it lowers your blood pressure, I am making a Tier 3 claim. When I tell you it improves your mood, I am making a Tier 5 claim. These are different bets, different odds, different confidence. Now I want to show you what the pharmaceutical industry has built around the same molecular pathway. The hormone the pineal releases when the skin tells it to, melatonin, is sold in pill form for somewhere between $5 and $30 a bottle. Most of those pills contain doses between 1 milligram and 10 milligrams. Your pineal gland, on a normal night, releases somewhere between 0.01 and 0.1 milligrams of melatonin total. The pills overshoot the physiological dose by a factor of 10 to 100. That is a $10 billion industry, give or take, depending on which year you ask. The active molecule in those pills is identical to the one your pineal makes. The pathway it activates, binding to the melatonin receptor 1 and melatonin receptor 2 on the skin itself, is identical to the pathway your endogenous melatonin uses for feedback. There is a prescription drug called Melatonin. It binds the same two receptors with higher selectivity. Wholesale cost in the United States is roughly $2 to $4 per pill. There is a class of light therapy boxes, 10,000 lux LED panels, that retail for between $60 and $300. They are FDA cleared for seasonal affective disorder. They work by activating melanopsin-containing iPRGCs. The mechanism is identical to outdoor sunlight. The spectrum is narrower. The intensity has to be calibrated by distance from the panel. Then there is the broader sleep medication industry. Zolpidem, ezopiclone, the benzodiazepines used for sleep. These do not work through the same pathway. They sedate the cortex by enhancing GABA signaling. They are downstream chemical solutions to a problem that is, in many cases, an upstream timing problem with the circadian system. Zolpidem alone is a $1 billion molecule. The intervention I have just described to you is not a pill. It is not a supplement. It is not a sedative. It is not a meditation technique. It is not a sleep hygiene rule about screens. It is a single physical input, photons of the right wavelength at the right time for the right duration, entering your eye, that activates a 400 million-year-old vertebrate clock, which then drives a hormone cascade that has been running in your ancestors for longer than there have been mammals. I want to be careful, because I do not want to oversell. If you have a clinical sleep disorder, sleep apnea, severe insomnia, a phase delay so extreme that your body wants to sleep at 4 in the morning, light alone may not fix it. The pharmaceutical interventions exist for a reason. Some people have circadian rhythms so disrupted that they require a pharmacological reset, not a behavioral one. Light therapy and outdoor exposure are first line for mild and moderate cases. For severe cases, they are adjuncts. But for the vast majority of people who have a slightly drifting clock, who fall asleep slightly later than they want, who wake slightly groggy, whose melatonin onset has crept later because they have not seen 10,000 lux of natural light in 3 months, the intervention has been engineered into your retina by 400 million years of vertebrate evolution. It is free. It is faster than a pill. It is, in a sense, more precise than a supplement, because your own sen is calibrating the dose in real time, based on what your local sky actually looks like at this latitude on this morning of this season. There is a phrase my grandmother used to say to me when I was a child. She would tell me, on a school morning, "Go outside before breakfast. Get the sun in your eyes." I want you to consider what she had figured out without ever having heard the word melanopsin. She had not read David Berson's 2002 paper. She did not know there was a structure called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, or that it contained 20,000 cells responsive to 480 nanometer photons. She did not know any of the molecular chemistry I just spent 30 minutes describing. She did not know about the retinohypothalamic tract. She had never heard the phrase dim light melatonin onset. She had no concept of phase response curves. But she had observed, across a long life of watching children, that the ones who got morning sun slept better at night, and she had compressed that observation into an instruction of 7 words. Get the sun in your eyes. The mechanism behind that instruction is what I have just walked you through. The retinohypothalamic tract, the phase-shifted skin, the advanced N-acetyltransferase activity in the pineal, the earlier dim light melatonin onset. 7 words on her lips. 40 minutes of physics on this lecture. Same prescription. The folk wisdom and the molecular biology are not in tension. They are describing the same event, from 2 ends of the same pathway. She knew what she could see. The lab knew what it could measure. The mechanism was the same all along. So tomorrow morning, when you wake up, before you check your phone, before you turn on the kitchen lights, before you sit down with your coffee in a room with the curtains drawn, go to a window or step outside. Face the sky. Do not look at the sun. Open your eyes. Stand there. 90 seconds is the floor. 10 minutes is better. 20 minutes is what your physiology was actually built for. The melatonin you will release tonight is being scheduled right now by the morning light entering your eyes. Get the light. Tell me below, what time will you step outside tomorrow morning, and what did your grandmother used to say about the sun?